What I need you to do right now is walk away from those talking heads on your TV, turn off that reality garbage that's poisoning your brains, read in between the lines because it's time to disconnect with Arif Ali. Imagine being 8 years old again and you're sleeping in your bed. All is fine in the world. You don't have a care to think about besides waking up the next morning and going to school. All of a sudden you're greeted with loud pounding at your door. Your parents awake, go to the door, and standing there are two military men demanding that you leave your house now. Not a chance to go pack your things and get out. Not an explanation for why you are being evicted. Two men holding guns in military uniform telling you to leave now. What do? Do you fight back? What are the odds of a family fighting back against two men with guns? Chances are pretty slim. So what do? You take your family, what you have on your back, and you leave. Now, you hope to take this up to a higher authority. You go and see someone, hopefully within your government, that can represent you and fix this problem. This has to be a misunderstanding. This can't be real. Nobody can come and just throw you out of your house just for no reason and that's it, take it away. A house you've been paying for, a house that you've been working on, a land that you've been working and generationally owned for years and years and years. Nobody can take that away from you. So you realize, okay, tomorrow we'll go to our government, figure this out and get our homes back. So you go and talk to your city officials and say, sorry, it's out of my hands. Go back and talk to the military. You go and talk to the military and say, you know what? That house you were living on for all those years has now been reclaimed by the military and is not fit to live in anymore. Okay, reasonable explanation. So where's my replacement house? You don't have a replacement house. Find a place to live. So instead of you finding another place to live, you see another family being moved into the place that you live. I wish I could make this shit up. I wish I could tell you that this has never happened and will never happen. But it happens. It happens all the time. It's happening right now as we speak in reclaimed lands in Palestine. Why aren't you hearing about it? Why isn't this on your news station? Why are the people that you trust to give you the most important news not telling you this? Could it be a larger conspiracy, that New World Order taking over your lives and preventing you from knowing this information? No. Your news stations are designed to give you news that you need to know immediately, not what's affecting the greater world. Because if you saw what was happening that was affecting the greater world, you would give a fuck. You would want to know. It would pain you to see a family being evicted by a military just because they don't look the way you're supposed to look to own land. And it's really is that simple. And you can say, well, there's a lot more to it. And you're right. There is a lot more to it. The conflict in Israel between the Palestinians and the Israelites has been ongoing for over 150 years. This isn't something that started yesterday. This isn't something that's been brewing for a decade, 2 decades. If all you know about the Palestine and Israeli conflict is Yasser Arafat and Shimon Peres, then you don't know enough. You need to do a little more research and you need to dig a little deeper. Because there are figures in place that have created this conflict and funded it and stemmed it to where it is today so that it can be kept and contained in the form that it is today. And what I mean by that is there's a brilliant documentary made called The Law in These Parts by Ra'anan Alexandrovich that takes you inside the justice system of Israel and shows you what the people that were making the decisions on Palestinian lives were really thinking as they were making these decisions. And I think you'd be shocked. I think your jaw would drop if you found out how easily people's rights were being taken away in Palestine. And you could think to yourself, oh, that's happening on the other side of the world. It doesn't affect me. I don't need to worry about this. It does affect you. It does matter. You do need to know. Anywhere that a child is suffering, you need to know. Anywhere that a family is going through upheaval of their entire lives, you need to know. I'm not going to be able to fit everything you need to know about Israel and Palestine into a half an hour. But what I am going to do is I'm going to give you some context. I'm going to give you some facts to think about. And I want you to leave with this information in your mind, knowing that if it can happen to them, it can happen to you. And you can say Canada is a sovereign nation for now. You can say that you live in a country that respects your free rights for now. But eventually there will be a time where the scarcity of resources will cause militaries to panic, will cause countries to panic. And unfortunately, with our limited population and our massive amounts of land that we have through Canada, we are the perfect victim to be taken over. Now, like I said earlier, this conflict goes back 150 years. I'm not trying to put a scare into you and say, Be a doomsday prepper, find a basement, hide, cover yourself up, make sure no one finds you. No. I want you to be able to see the signs. I want you to be able to look at your situation with some clarity and realize how fortunate you are to live in a society at this point that really lets you do whatever the fuck you want, however you want. So before World War I, this area of the world, which we now call Israel, was governed by the Ottoman Empire, and Palestinians resided on the land. Before the build-up up until World War I, the Ottoman Empire knew they were going to be disbanded and taken apart. So in their haste, signed off multiple agreements to ensure that certain lands went to certain people at certain times. One of those guarantees was called the Hussein McMahon Correspondence, which was signed in 1915, and basically guaranteed every single Arab nation the freedom and autonomy to make their own decisions after World War I had subsided, which meant they wouldn't be overrun by other countries. They wouldn't be governed by anybody else. They would have freedom and independence to be their own sovereign nations. This is what was expected in Palestine. There was also another agreement called the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which secretly divided up the entire Ottoman Empire between Britain and France. What kind of shady bullshit is that? How can you guarantee countries their own sovereignty and then secretly sign another agreement behind closed doors saying, well, I'm going to take this piece of land, I'll take that, you take that, you take that, you take that. These are fucking nations. They aren't toys. This is not a fucking baseball card game where you exchange cards. Yeah, you give me that one, I'll give you this one. Get the fuck out of here. They were gambling and playing with people's lives. When you were studying social studies in high school, were you taught this? Were you taught that the UK and France carved up the Middle East for their own toys? I doubt you were taught this. And if you were, props to your teacher, because they didn't give a fuck. They taught you what was written in that textbook, and that's all they wanted you to know. I'm going to expand your horizons a little bit. So there's 2 documents already signed saying that the Ottoman Empire is going to be divided in a certain way. Now, the third one probably has the most importance because it involves somebody, a name that you may have heard before, the name of the Rothschild. Now you could think, ooh, conspiracy theory. Here we go with the New World Order. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is Lord Rothschild had a lot of influence, still has a lot of influence. One of the largest land-owning families on the planet. And he was a part of a document called the Balfour Declaration, which basically explicitly stated that the people of Israel should have their own home for themselves. The document also stated that nobody that is already on the land would be forcibly uprooted and would not be removed, and their property rights wouldn't be changed that would affect them negatively. So basically what it said was that there would be assimilation of the Jewish people into Palestine so that they could live together harmoniously. Not to kill each other and murder each other and destroy each other, but harmoniously. In between time, a lot of agreements were made between landowners about how their land would be used in as far as cultivation and agriculture went. Now, the agreements that were signed at the time, Palestinian landowners made sure that they kept ownership of their land, but would allow Jewish workers. Once Jewish landowners started to buy property, they would put clauses into their contracts saying that Jewish land can only be worked by Jewish labor, which explicitly removed Palestinians from the equation. But this is land they already owned. How can you sell land to somebody else when it's already owned by somebody else? Someone comes to your house that doesn't live there, moves in, and sells it because they want to. Does that make it right? Does that all of a sudden make it a sale? I don't think so. In fact, I know so. We all know so. That's just simple. But after World War I, the world was slim pickings. And the powers that were available at the time made sure that they carved up the Middle East exactly how they wanted to so that their interests were furthered and protected. This all kept going like this up until World War II. Now, I'm not going to get too much into that. We all know what happened. The arrival of Hitler and the slaughter of Jews across Europe. One of the most darkest and troubling times of our limited existence on this earth. Once World War II had run its course, the State of Israel was born May 15th, 1948. And it basically allowed a portion of the area which is known as Israel today to be divided and carved up so that Palestinians and Israelis would each have an equal share of land that they were supposedly told they were entitled to. The problem with that is that the agreements that were signed originally to give the Palestinians and the Israelis their own pieces of land were never upheld or never lived up to. Palestine was governed by Britain for the next little while until Israelis were able to have their own government and start to create their own mandates, which slowly pushed the Palestinians out of lands that they had been on for centuries. Once the state of Israel had been established, they wanted to have somebody represent the new nation of Israel with pride. So the person that they chose to lead them into the new world was Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein himself declined the position to be the first ever head of state of Israel because he knew that there was no way you'd be able to move Jewish people into the state of Palestine without bloodshed and without war, and he was not for that. He was severely against that, and he made it very public that he would not be a part of the establishment of an Israeli state. Brilliant man, obviously, because since then, there has been nothing but turmoil and war. In between that time, the Israeli military has been fighting wars with neighboring Arab nations for decades with no end in sight. Where it stands today is that the United States provides $8.5 million a day in strictly military aid to Israel. That's $3.1 billion yearly that the Israeli military gets to beef up their military with the most advanced, high-grade, American-made weapons. Per capita, Israeli is the second largest military on the planet as far as military spending goes. Second to whom? You guessed it, good old US of A. You cannot have a warring nation without a backup plan, and the United States is Israel's backup plan. It has been that way, it will remain that way until somebody with enough balls stands up to AIPAC and says, you know what? Fuck that funding. Let's give this money back to our people. We have cities that are going bankrupt. Entire cities going bankrupt. And yet they're giving away $8.5 million worth of military aid to a country that doesn't need it. And the reason why I say they don't need it is because on the news you may hear certain things. You may hear, man, those people in Palestine, they're crazy. Suicide bombing civilians, killing civilians. The Israeli people have no choice. They have to fight back. But like most things that are presented in the news media, you have been led astray. You have been told only a part of the story. Now I'm going to try and give you some stats to make this argument a little more clear. Over the past 13 years, there have been 129 Israeli children that have been killed, in comparison to 1,519 Palestinian children being killed. Now, to me, a child is a child. I don't care what race he is, what nationality he is. If a child dies, that in itself is enough for all conflict to end. However, we don't think the same way as most world leaders. In that same 13-year period, 1,104 Israeli adults have died. 6,829 Palestinians have died. 9,100 Israeli people have been injured, in comparison to 50,000 Palestinian people that have been injured in the same period of time. 98.9% of Palestinian deaths occur on Palestinian land. Only 53% of Israeli deaths occur on Israeli land. From 1955 to 1992, there have been 65 UN resolutions going against the state of Israel, 0 going against Palestine. These UN resolutions range from anywhere to Palestinians not being treated with civility, Palestinian people not being given the opportunity to farm their own land, drink their own water, so on and so forth. Now, if the United Nations is telling you that what you're doing is wrong, isn't that supposed to create change? Isn't that country supposed to be held up to certain standards and given certain expectations to follow? But in this situation, it didn't happen. Why is that? Well, because the United States is the largest funder to the United Nations appropriately. They are also the largest funder to Israeli military appropriately. And in my opinion, the way I see it, you're going to think this is fucked, but unfortunately, this is how I see it. Whether you like it or not, the United States is a Christian country. You can take it how you want, doesn't really matter, but it's the truth. Every president swears on the Bible when they are sworn in to uphold certain standards. The Constitution separated church and state. However, it is plainly obvious, even going back to previous President Cokehead Bush, that when they go to war in the name of God. God came to George Bush in a dream and said, go fight those devils. So, it is a Christian country. As a Christian country, they believe that Jesus will come back one day to the motherland and their Savior will come back save them all and they're going to take off on a spaceship to heaven and all will be well. I don't mean to offend anybody that's religious. I myself am a Muslim by birth, but unfortunately, this is how the fairy tale goes. If there are Muslims that control Israel, Jesus is going to come back and be mad, isn't he? He's going to be like, why are those people on my land? I'm here for Christians, even though Jesus was Jewish. By now, you're probably as confused as I am. A Christian country wants to defend the homeland for the people of Jerusalem so that the people of Islam won't be there when the Savior shows up to save the Christians, even though Jesus was Jewish. That makes sense to you? Doesn't make sense to me. However, I believe that this fucked up situation is because of the return of a Savior. Now, if this is not the case, and this isn't all because of the Savior that's going to return, I need some explanation. I need a few things explained to me. Why isn't Israel held up to the same standards as other countries throughout the world? Why are the conditions that they've created, which are now looked at as apartheid, allowed when other countries have to follow certain standards? Why doesn't Israel have to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty? Why are they able to stockpile nuclear weapons by the hundreds and not sign the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, which is required by every single country that has nuclear weapons? Why is that not the case? Why is Iran being told not to even start a nuclear program when UN weapons inspectors have said they don't even have the capability to create a nuclear weapon immediately, yet Israel is able to stockpile them? Why is Israel able to create settlements on Palestinian land when the United Nations has strictly forbidden them to do so? When the acts and declarations that they have signed that made them a state say they're not allowed to create settlements, why are they creating settlements and not being told otherwise? Why is Benjamin Netanyahu able to go in front of the United Nations with a fucking drawing of a bomb and a red line on it and tell the world that we cannot let Israel get to this red line? Why is that able to happen without someone saying, you know what, you idiot, shut the fuck up, sit down, and grow up? This is like a freaking Bugs Bunny cartoon when someone holds up a bomb and says, I'm drawing a red line, don't pass that red line, but I can have hundreds of nuclear weapons and you can't say shit about it. All of these things leads me to a conclusion. Either the United States is governed by Israel and we're just too stupid to know about it, or they have a combined interest to protect the state of Israel for a specific purpose. I don't really know what that purpose is. It's a very small piece of land, really doesn't have a lot to offer as far as natural resources goes, not oil heavy like the rest of the Middle East. There's got to be a reason. If you can think of a different or a better reason, you tell me. But I can't think of any other reason that a country is able to build a wall that's going to be 700 kilometers long, a 60-meter wide exclusion area, and 26 feet tall. And remember, this wall is made out of solid concrete. Now, the reason for the wall, Israel says, is for security reasons. The statistics that I gave you earlier obviously prove otherwise. The only security Israel really needs is from Israel itself. The only thing destroying Israel is this small group of hardliners that are within the government that are creating this ultra anti-Palestinian state, which is forcing the rest of the people of Israel to just follow along. Now, the citizens of Israel, they don't want this. They don't want Palestinians to live like this. In popular elections, they have voted for candidates that prefer assimilation to separation. So it's not like the people of Israel want this. The government of Israel wants this. And they're turning into one of the most scary, vile, isolationist governments you can imagine. What I mean by this is there are aquifers that run throughout Gaza Strip that would provide the entire state of Israel with more than enough water to keep everyone hydrated. However, these aquifers of water are being stolen and funneled only to areas where Israelis live, so Palestinians can't use it for irrigating their land, they can't use it to drink, they can't use it to bathe. What they're getting is the leftover. And unfortunately, the leftover portion of the water is so contaminated that waterborne illnesses in Palestine have skyrocketed over the past decade. Where's the outrage? Who's talking about this? And like I said before, I can't make this shit up. This is not fake. This is happening now in your world. Now, don't think of your world as the area and the neighborhood you live in. This entire blue planet is your world. You live in it. It's your job to know what's happening in your world. I don't understand how people that were treated as horribly as the Israelis were during the time of the Holocaust can create the same kind of conditions on another people that they were sworn they would govern with efficiency and compassion. They were separated the same way Palestinians are separated. They were put into camps the same way the Palestinians are put into camps. The only difference with the Israeli government and Hitler's government is that they're just not slaughtering them wholesale. Not yet, at least. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but as you can see with the way wars build up, you're only told a quarter of the story until the whole story comes out 20, 30 years from now. These are the same kind of apartheid conditions that Jews created in South Africa. It didn't take much. All it took was a limited amount of people with a lot of power to create apartheid in South Africa. Same apartheid which they've now created in the state of Israel. When you have a chance to listen to this, and you look at the argument that's presented to you, a few things that you have to realize is that this is not ancient news. This is current events. It is happening right now. There are hundreds of different websites that you can go to find this information and educate yourself. Since 1967, there have been 27,000 Palestinian homes destroyed. 0 Israeli homes destroyed. Now, in the words of a Palestinian political activist, you who claim to be the only democracy in the Middle East are trying me under laws written by authorities I have not elected and which do not represent me. This statement should be plastered on the law courts of every country that has ever suffered from apartheid or genocide or injustice or the oppression of their civilians. Everybody should have heard this by now. There's another documentary named 5 Broken Cameras that was made in 2011 that was made by 2 political activists, one Palestinian named Ahmad Bernat and a Jewish political activist named Guy Davidi. And they go in depth into villages in Palestine and show soldiers walking into these villages, reclaiming land that was held by families, discarding children like they're garbage, meaningless, and evicted like they mean nothing. Like they have absolutely 0 value. Now you're telling me that a government seeing a child thrown out of their home is not going to act? Do they not have a responsibility to ensure that that child doesn't grow up hating the country that they live in? What do you think is going to happen to the mind state of these children that are growing up in homes, seeing their parents evicted from homes that they've lived on for years? They're not going to grow up hating Israelis. They won't grow up hating the Israeli flag, hating the Israeli government. I'm sorry, if I was a child growing up in that situation, I would have 0 problem taking up arms. I would have all the motivation I need in the world to fight back. Fight to the death. What else do you have to live for? You are going to fight till you die. And if the Israeli government doesn't see this as justification for Palestinian people to fight back, then we have a major problem. Our problem is way larger than this situation. If the people of the world don't see this and hear this and think that the Palestinian people don't have justification to fight back, then we have a huge problem. If the people of the world don't think that somebody being evicted from their home, seeing their parents evicted from their homes is just cause to fight back, then we as a people have lost our way. We really don't know whether we're coming or going. It is your responsibility to find out about things like this in the world and communicate it to people that you know. The more people that you know about this, the more people will give a shit. The more people will think that maybe this should stop. Maybe this will end. Just like you were able to put an end to the Vietnam War back in the 70s, the same way you were able to stem the tide of the war in Iraq with protests, is the same way people should be laying down their freedom every single day to make sure that they protect the people of Palestine from further apartheid, from further persecution on their own land. Without you and me, the voiceless have no voice. Without us, people under oppression have no choice. Their only choice is violence. And unfortunately, in this situation, violence begets violence. It starts with us and it ends with us.